Oi, oi, alright, how's it going? I'm Grant, you're you, and this is Doodle Review. As we go into 2024, I'm going to be introducing a new format to the channel, Saturday specials. Just like Sunday Jazz Club, where every week we go and take a look at a jazz album, new or old. Every Saturday we'll be taking a special look at an artist, album, genre, or musical topic. We'll go through some rankings, tier list, and deep dives. And yeah, it's that twilight zone between Christmas and New Year, so a Bloody Mary is totally acceptable for a video like this and even encouraged by some, or me. We're kicking off this Saturday special with an album ranking that's bound to be controversial, the Arctic Monkeys. Arctic Monkeys are a special band for me because they were the first and maybe the only band that feels like my band. So many bands I love started before my time, and so as much as you might completely fall in love with them, that magic of the discovery of their music is kind of retrospective. The Monkeys are the first band I got into that I was there for the start, and I've grown up with them. As much as I've come to discover emerging artists since then, few, maybe none, of them have gone on to have the absolute juggernaut success in the way this Sheffield band have, meaning their evolutions aren't ever as culturally impactful. And you also can't replicate the fact that when I Bet You Look Good on the Dance Floor came out, I was like 13 or 14. I just in the previous couple of years settled into my kind of music fandom, and I was ready. I was ready to completely get swept up in a band that felt new, exciting, and didn't belong to a previous generation. So just like Foo Fighters have a very special place in my heart for being my kind of gateway band, Arctic Monkeys have the same for being that band where every album maps to a specific point in my life. But just like the Foo Fighters, when it comes to an album ranking, I'm not going to go soft for nostalgia's sake. So without any further ado, let's get into it. We're going to go in chronological order, so let's start with Whatever People Say. Now, I know there are the Beneath the Boardwalk demos and the MySpace tracks and whatnot, but 2006 is Whatever People Say I Am, That's What I'm Not, is the official debut record, so that's where we're going to start. I won't do this for all of them, but when I think of this album, I think of the sheer excitement I had for it to come out. At the time, I was reading NME every week, which in 2006 was essentially Arctic Monkeys Weekly, feeding the massive hype around the band. And the record came out just before I got my first Saturday job, so I had no money, and I remember one afternoon walking around HMV trying to find a loose sale sticker that I might be able to stick over the official $12.99 price of the album, so I could go to the till and, I don't know, try and claim false advertising, that urban legend that they should be able to sell it to you for whatever price that was on there, and hopefully get away with the £5 or £6 I've managed to scramble together. The album is a British classic. It probably doesn't translate globally in the way that every subsequent album would get slightly better at doing each time, but the gritty, poetic dispatches of UK nightlife, drinking, pubs, relationships just resonated in a way that hadn't collectively been felt en masse since the 90s days of Oasis. The Definitely Maybe comparisons were made non-stop at the time, but what's funny is how the bands couldn't really be more different. Aside from a northern English sensibility, the Monkeys were riffier, angular, faster, and Alex Turner's lyrics in this era, despite great wordplay, were actually examples of very direct storytelling compared to Noel Gallagher's often broad, sweeping generalizations about love. The View from the Afternoon is a perfect introduction and also a perfect summarization of influences and ingredients that Alex Turner, Matt Helders, Jamie Cook, and then bassist Andy Nicholson were pulling from. It has the raw, detached, but passionate essence of The Strokes' Is This It?, the guitar and drum breaks reminiscent of Queens of the Stone Age's Song for the Dead, and Turner's lyricism that actually had more in common with hip-hop in terms of actual words used than we'd ever really seen in rock music to date. Across 13 tracks and 40 minutes, the band takes us in various directions, probably the heaviest being that first track, Afternoon, following it with the raw pop power of Dance Floor, and later When the Sun Goes Down, Sensitivity on Riot Van and Mardy Bum, Buzzcocks Punk on Still Take You Home, and a dash of kind of white boy funk on Dancing Shoes and Red Light. Songs about scraps outside the taxi rank, bastard bouncers, going a bit Frank Spencer, and drinking Tropical Reef might not have the same impact for global audiences, but This is a banger album, a perfect debut and a clear S tier record. Next, we have Favourite Worst Nightmare, the extremely fast follow-up and Monkeys' powerhouse sophomore record that arrived in 2007. And to talk about the Arctic Monkeys is to talk about a band that consistently make great decisions when it comes to their career, and this is a point I'll go back to as we go through the discography because I find it interesting and don't hear it discussed often. I just think it's so smart. Whatever people say became the UK's fastest selling debut album of all time, gaining endless accolades from critics and fans alike. Success on this level creates an absolute pressure cooker when it comes to putting together a follow-up, and many bands could easily become frozen by analysis paralysis, trying to outthink the expectations and ultimately just either choking, releasing a dud, or losing momentum. Arctic Monkeys got straight back into it, getting the album out before having too much time to overthink it, in the process both capitalising on the momentum and releasing the pressure valve before it became too much to overcome. Again, stylistically, they made great decisions. Favourite Worst Nightmare takes the tried and tested approach of other hyped acts like Oasis, like The Strokes, when it comes to album number 2. Just do it again, but bigger. There's a better production, a wider palette of instrumentation, and a little dash of some more sophisticated arrangements, but on the whole, the energy, the riffs, the angular, punchy delivery, and that down-to-earth northern English lyrical perspective all remained intact, making this a crowd-pleasing and unusually a critic-pleasing follow-up. I actually think next to AM, this is the band's best produced and best sounding album, aided in part by the magic of UK producing legend, guitar tone whisperer Alan Moulder contributing to the mixing. The mixes and overall production managed to perfectly balance the crackling energy coming off of the performances while introducing a sonic depth not previously heard on the debut. Great bass tones, wider cinematic guitar sounds, organs, synths and strings. It's really hard to achieve the sound they did here, the energy but also the depth, and they did it really well. Songwriting wise, I do think everything is a banger here. I can gladly sing along with everything, but that's ultimately because I've listened to this record hundreds of times, which in and of itself is an admission of how great it is. But if I step outside my familiarity a bit, I'll say songs like The Bad Thing feel less like classic Arctic Monkeys and just a top-notch UK indie band. I also think as much as I like these tracks individually, there is a lot of shared DNA between House is a Circus, If You Were There Beware and Old Yellow Bricks that make this part of the album merge together a little bit. With those things in mind, I would put this in the A tier, but nonetheless a banger. Okay, so let's take a look at Humbug, the 2009 third record that saw the boys going out to the desert, linking up with Queens of the Stone Age's Josh Homme and getting darker, psychedelic and just overall weirder with it. Again, just thinking about this record in the context of the Monkeys' wider career, I think this was such a great decision. While Favourite Worst Nightmare had slayed the dragon of expectation and pressure, it immediately created a new enemy in its place, which for lack of a better word, I'll borrow a movie term and call typecasting. After the success of Nightmare, the band were presented with the choice: release another high-energy UK indie sequel album or subvert expectations and evolve their sound. Option 1 would have been a guaranteed crowd pleaser and a guaranteed money spinner, but I think the band might have known as well, this kind of success would have been akin to like a Sugar Rush. A third indie disco ready record like Nightmare Part 2 or whatever people say Part 3 would have further intertwined the Monkeys with that wider indie scene, which while still at full force in 2009 was destined to have an expiry date, and everything does. This would make the chance of the band building a sustainable long-term career that can weather the storm of passing trends and create a legacy. It would make the chances of that happening 100 times, 1,000 times harder by the time it came to do album number 4. Option 2, evolving their sound, going in a different direction and subverting expectations with a slower, darker, more psychedelic sound. Going down this route, which Humbug ultimately was, is the reason Arctic Monkeys have the career they do. It's the reason they escaped the indie landfill label, even if it meant taking a hit in mainstream popularity and success. I chalk this up to another band decision because, contrary to popular belief, Humbug's slower sound, with the tempo kind of being the biggest marker of change to the naysayers, contrary to popular belief, this was not actually Josh Homme's influence. Homme was actually quoted as saying at the time that there were a lot of faster paced songs the Monkees were working on during his time on the record, but the band opted not to use them. A few of those actually came out as like B-sides and extra tracks. In fact, half of the finished record, Humbug, was actually recorded and produced outside of the Queen's frontman's supervision in New York with longtime producer James Ford. So while this is always credited as the Monkees' desert record, that's kind of only half true. At any rate, the decision to slow things down was a conscious and a calculated one. The finished album is a fan favourite, producing cult tracks like Pretty Visitors that still make their presence felt in live sets to this date, alongside singles like the odd but infectious Crying Lightning and the majestic, timeless Cornerstone. In 2009, my two favourite bands were Queens of the Stone Age and Arctic Monkeys, so back then I thought this was the universe giving me the perfect album. To this day I still love it, but while the arrangements, riffs and style feel catered to my personal taste, like a tailored suit, from a songwriting perspective I have come to see it as a bit of a gangly, spotted teenager. It really feels like a kind of transitional moment, and as a result there are some stretch marks that I can see now. These mostly come in the form of Alex Turner's lyrics, which took more of a left turn than the music itself. Dispensing with the tales of booze-fueled nights out, Turner dove headfirst into the romantic surrealism of songwriters like Nick Cave. And this led to moments of sheer brilliance like Cornerstone, which is a funny but also beautiful little story about longing and mistaken identity, and Pretty Visitors, a mystical description of live music likening playing to kind of summoning snakes. I think this surrealism though also led to some teenage cringe-inducing slam poetry symbolism of Potion approaching. Similarly, I think the music on occasion also tries to make something provocative out of not very much. Again, Potion approaching, but also Fire and the Thud. Despite those critiques, the record also has some very underrated moments in the Monkees canon. Dangerous Animals and Dance Little Liar are absolutely killer tunes that seem to have become forgotten relics as far as the band's live shows go, and The Jeweler's Hands has one of my favourite Nick O'Malley bass parts. This one is going in the B tier. It's great, but it's got some holes. That takes us to Suck It and See. The band's next effort, releasing in 2011, came after a period of heartbreak for Turner, which somewhat determined the direction of the record, but from a fan's perspective, before it came out, because of the sharp left turn that Humbug took, it was kind of anyone's guess where this album would go stylistically. While the upbeat Brick by Brick was the first showing of new music, it was the sludgy dirge of Don't Sit Down 'Cause I've Moved Your Chair that became the first official single, and initially this indicated a potential sequel to Humbug, with a riff big enough and repetitive enough to pass as a forgotten Queens of the Stone Age single from their first record. Short, sharp banger library pictures aside though, this signpost to the Mojave Desert proved to be a complete misdirect, with the resulting album actually a glossy guitar pop reverie with panoramic guitars, vocal harmonies and lyrical symbolism dialed back just enough to reveal the sensitivity at the heart of the songs. You could really describe this record as a kind of marriage between the classic 60s songcraft that Turner dipped his toe into on the first Shadow Puppets album with a kind of Humbug desert rock hangover. This is another album I fell in love with at the time, but have noticed some frayed ends since. This time not with the lyrics. Here Turner seemed to immediately right the ship and find an equilibrium between the opaque symbolism and telling a story with a clear emotional truth that the listener can actually follow. I just feel in some cases that forcing all of the songs here into full band arrangements result in some clunky scaffolding around what would probably be a brilliant acoustic singer-songwriter piece. Over the years and repeated listens, She's Thunderstorms, Black Treacle and even Hellcat feel like quite delicate songs that have just forced into an upbeat rock band arrangement, like a shy kid in a Halloween costume they don't feel comfortable in. The approach works beautifully on Reckless Serenade, Suck It and See, and my favourite That's Where You're Wrong, but yeah, on those Other ones, the normally spellbinding kind of creative drums feel awkward and a little out of place. It's an album that feels probably a bit like its key songwriter did at the time, a little lost and a little unsure of themselves, but even then, I'm a pretty big fan, so I'd chuck this in the B tier as well. Next up, we got AM. I'm going to take a drink for this one. The band's global 2013 breakthrough, the album that took them from megastars in the UK to rock stars worldwide in a way that, again, it's a comparison that I don't think the world has seen since Oasis. Arguably, the Monkees actually broke America in a way that the Gallaghers couldn't, even at the height of their powers. I also don't think we've seen a band reach this level of rock stardom since. The closest might be the 1975, but while they have hits and make headlines, I think there are huge swaths of people, particularly those that don't live online, that probably couldn't name you a song, much less tell you anything about them. Again, the stylistic shift was another beautifully executed decision, essentially giving people what they had wanted from the band since fans started to fall off with Humbug, a straight up rock album with bangers and easy to follow lyrics about relatable topics like going out, getting after it and hooking up. The band gave themselves freedom. They created space by subverting expectations on Humbug and Suck It, such that pursuing a mainstream sound and revisiting the themes of their debut could be done on their own terms while continuing to evolve their sound and try new things. Musically, AM sounds nothing like whatever people say I am. It's slower, it's spacious, it's smoother, self-assured and confident. You know, in place of frantic, busy drum fills are deep, almost hip-hop like grooves. Instead of pub-like group vocals, we get Motown high-pitched vocal harmonies. There's a world-beating swagger instead of nervous, don't believe the hype energy. The musical differences are endless, but spiritually the records are entwined. Thematically, playing the first and the fifth record back-to-back, you hear the same core desires, but through the perspective of 19, 20-year-olds that are fresh down the pub, and then kind of 27, 28-year-olds who've been about a bit. While I think you could potentially say this record is guilty of being a bit formulaic, number one party anthem, Mad Sounds and I Wanna Be Yours aside, the songs can be pretty much boiled down to hip-hop beat, smooth blues rock riff, soul backing vocal hook, and lusty crooning vocal, which by the time we get to snap out of it is just on the limit of wearing out its welcome. But while you could say that, I think AM just about avoids it by 1, not wearing out its welcome. It's a pretty succinct album. 2, often arranging those parts of the formula in a unique way, like in Knee Socks for instance. And 3, just being damn good. Every song is a banger. They actually execute the whole thing so well that they get away with having the same song on the record twice. Look, one for the road and Why'd You Only Call Me When You're High are incredibly similar, but they pull it off. Those songs are the same. Do I Want to Know? I think it's a bit overrated, but you know what? When it's on this album, when you're listening to it, it's just got the riz to pull it off. This is an S tier album. Okay, so next up, Tranquility Base, Hotel and Casino. It's where the kings of the rug pull, they do it again. Probably recognizing that releasing an AM sequel was only going to take them down the road of kind of self-parody. The band once again decided to cut the lead jacket off of expectation off them just by not even trying to do anywhere near the same thing. Tranquility Base is a piano-driven, science fiction-laced lounge lizard rock album that recalls David Bowie's Plastic Soul, a dash of Serge Gainsbourg cool and Leonard Cohen poetry. Alex Turner once again wraps himself up in mystery by creating a conceptual focal point, the retro futuristic world of a hotel and casino resort based on the moon. But what could become alienating becomes intriguing. There is also an air of self-awareness on this record with meta moments in which he or his Alex Turner character, or the specific character of this album, Mark, talks about wanting to be one of the Strokes, or playing to quiet rooms, or being too wild in the 70s. I think this breaks the ice. It stops things getting too pretentious and becomes a fantastical journey that both songwriter and audience kind of recognize the ridiculousness of. Musically, you can tell the majority of the songs began on piano, but whereas some of the full band arrangements of acoustic songs on Suck It felt forced, The band seem to have learnt a restraint on Tranquility Base that allows them to fill out the compositions without getting in the way of the core song. This makes each track really fun to get lost inside and makes the lunar setting not just believable but genuinely engrossing. Golden Trunks reminds me of Diamonds Are Forever era Bond scores, and the aptly titled Bat Phone has a camp sensibility that could comfortably sit on the set of the 1966 Adam West Batman series. I do find the run from Monster Truck through to She Looks Like Fun a little trying on a song by song basis, but it does all work cohesively as a record. This, to me, is comfortably sitting in the A tier. Taking us finally then to The Car. Last year's 7th album from a band 16 years into their career was, well, to be honest, it was the first time I've been disappointed by an Arctic Monkeys album. Musically, this album is lush, continuing the lounge rock vibe of Tranquility Base while introducing widescreen cinematic strings and orchestration that we might have mandala effects superimposed on Tranquility Base, but really weren't actually there, although they definitely were on The Last Shadow Puppets' Everything You've Come to Expect. It's not the stylistic choice I have issue with here. The band proved just one album ago that they wear these suits quite well. There's just a lack of urgency here. Very few songs feel compelling or purposeful. There better be a mirror ball, body paint, and even the dark and sparse sculptures of Anything Goes really draw you in. But songs like The Car, where it feels like Turner is just absent-mindedly pontificating on a holiday, or Big Ideas, where we're hearing a diary entry about writer's block or writing a song, just feel totally self-serving and just plod along toward entropy. Stripping away that conceptual focal point, the science fiction of the prior record sees Turner's lyrics occasionally regress to that humbug era empty, ambiguous symbolism of word salad. I'm sure the Monkees will surprise us again with another stylistic shift, but if they do indeed stay in this laid-back chamber pop cinematic lounge rock zone, more power to them. I'm happy to hear it because sonically it's fantastic, but I just hope they rediscover a muse on the next record, something that can give them some sort of momentum, some sort of urgency. It doesn't need to manifest itself in up-tempo, but just substance. To me, I'm putting this in the D tier. Aside from the few high points, I find it a really frustrating listen. Well, there you have it. Arctic Monkeys albums ranked top to bottom. Go off in the comments, tell me your order, show some love, share some thoughts, or just wholesome abuse. I'm sure there'll be some, but make sure you subscribe to see lots more rankings and reviews in the future, and see you in the next video. Cheers, mate. Bye.